but a very happy Constitution Day or Law Day as it was erstwhile known. First of all, I wish to extend my gratitude to the organizers for arranging this session, especially Dr. Jagwani sir and Ms. Priyanka for their kind invitation and the coordination that followed before we had this session. I wish to begin this session especially with the gratitude and thank you for a particular reason, especially because of the troubled times we are in. This pandemic has taught us very crucial lessons, that is the importance of health, family, and most importantly, teachers, who along with the doctors have had additional responsibilities during this pandemic. They have worked tirelessly to ensure that students don't lose out on their education, even if it means putting their own health at risk. So thank you so much to all the teachers of this institution from my side and all your students, I believe, for all the hard work that you've been putting up behind the curtains, and you usually don't get the deserved attention and gratitude you deserve. Although I have been very generously introduced by ma'am, but I believe I should still tell you a little bit about myself and what I plan to speak on for the next half an hour or 45 minutes or so. My name is Swapnil. I am from the same city as majority of you, that is Kanpur. In fact, my alma mater is Purnachandra Vidyaniketan School in the city. And I'm currently pursuing my master's in constitutional law at the University of Oxford. I am a lawyer by profession, and trust me, it is not as glamorous as the mighty Harvey Specter in the TV show Suits or Bollywood makes it look like. However, it is a very empowering profession that allows me to make a difference to the lives around me and the people around. And dealing with the law requires me to deal with an important document, which is the holy book called the Constitution of India. This document holds a very important place in my life, so much so that I've not traveled around in the past few years without it, and I'll always have a copy of it in my bag. As you can see, I have one with me right now. I was particularly happy with this invitation because learning about the Constitution, which, by the way, is the longest and arguably the most empowering in the world, is not really a priority in India. It is commonly considered as a long, boring document which should be understood only by judges, lawyers, and politicians. And I always take offense when someone says that because I believe knowing a constitution is a basic duty of every citizen, as it not only empowers you, but it also makes you aware about your own rights. But it also ensures that no authority, no matter how powerful, can mistreat you, because the constitution doesn't allow them to do that. So today, in the next few minutes, I shall introduce you to the Indian Constitution and attempt to convince you of its importance and the role it plays in empowering its citizens, especially its youth. At the end of the session, if the students have any question, if that could be arranged, I'll be very happy to take any questions that they have. I think I have the time for that. So before I begin, you might wonder what's so special about today and why do we call the 26th of November as India's Constitution Day? As you know, India was once colonialized by the British, and we gained our independence on 15th August 1947. Our political leaders at the time decided to not simply follow the British law, which a lot of the erstwhile colonies were doing. They were either following the American law, which was the superpower at the time, or they were following the British law, which had colonialized almost all the countries in the world. But we decided to draft our own constitution, and our Constituent Assembly for that purposes was formed. It contained members from all over the country that represented every community in India, and their task was to give India its own constitution. You would be surprised to know that the assembly met and heavily debated for almost over 2 years, 11 months, and 17 days over every provision of our constitution. The drafting committee was headed by the great Dr. Ambedkar, who traveled all over the world, met leaders, judges, lawyers, to learn from their respective experience of the Constitution. The goal was simple: to give India the best possible constitution that is indigenous and meets our requirements, and not make the mistakes made by other countries by learning from them. Finally, on 26th November 1949, that is 71 years ago today, the Indian Constitution was ready and was adopted. The reason for choosing this particular date was the fact that in the year 1930, on this very day, the Indian National Congress had made a call for Purn Swaraj, a complete self-rule. While the Constitution came into force later, that is the 26th January, which we celebrate as a Republic Day, this day came to be called as Law Day, or as has been recently renamed as the Samvidhan Divas. Listening to me, you might wonder that why is it important for a non-lawyer or future engineers like all of you to know the Constitution? Does the Constitution even impact anything you do? You would be surprised to know of the role the Constitution plays in your life and the fact that it governs every aspect of your life, which includes what you eat, what you drink, where you eat, what you speak, where you go, etc., etc. There is no aspect of a citizen's life in India that is not traced back to the Constitution. For instance, let's take a contemporary example. If the government tomorrow makes a rule that chips and fast food cannot be sold in educational institution, which did happen a couple of years ago, a rule like that was passed. As students, I'm sure all of you do enjoy good food, and but if such a rule is passed, what can you do about it? Because you would ask yourself, do I have a right which is being infringed by such a rule? In other words, do you have a right to have a food of your liking? And if yes, where do you get that right? This hypothetical involves three core issues. First, do you have any liberty over what you eat? Yes, you do. Second, should you have the freedom to choose what you eat? Yes, you do. Third, can the government prohibit you from exercising this liberty and freedom? That's arguable, that it cannot. But where do you get these freedoms and this liberty which I speak of? All of it stems from this document called the Constitution of India. But if you don't know that you have these rights, which means if you don't know this Constitution, you'll never question anything the government is doing. You'll just agree to everything they do. But that is not how a democracy works, or a mature democracy works, which we want India to be. Therefore, most importantly, the Constitution enshrines certain rights for its citizens that are aimed at protecting them from an unlawful invasion by any authority. Therefore, knowing your rights shall ensure that you are not fooled or arbitrarily treated by any authority. Let me give you another example. Pick any American or a European movie where there is a depiction of a police officer entering a house either to search it or arrest somebody. In majority of the cases, you'll see that the occupant of the house first asks for an identification badge and then a search warrant or an arrest warrant before letting an officer in. Or you will see that on getting arrested, they will mandatorily ask for her/his lawyer before making any statement. Now, these are essential constitutional rights, which majority of them know or at least are aware about. However, in our country, sadly, this lack of knowledge allows the authorities to trouble the citizens illegally. Having interacted with many citizens myself, I can sadly say that very few citizens know their basic rights. For instance, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if all of you know that a police officer cannot arrest a lady or a woman post sunset and before sunrise, unless a female officer is accompanying them. Similarly, an officer is bound to wear an identification badge, which mentions his name and a designation if they come to investigate or interrogate you. They are supposed to mandatorily register a complaint if you go to them. And central to all these situations is the idea of a protected liberty, which your constitution guarantees to you. 2 years ago, I started a venture called The Basic Structure, wherein I attempt to simplify aspects of the Constitution of India for a layman's understanding. And I write in very simple, comprehensible English. And surprisingly, the readers of the blog are people like, people who are not lawyers like yourself. That includes my school teachers, the parents of my friends, students who are not pursuing law, people from other streams, etc. However, my motivation behind this initiative was based on a very sad news item I had read in the Indian Express. In fourth year of law school, I had read that a poor vegetable vendor was fined by the authorities for using the Indian national flag as the roof of his tattered house. The vendor cried, he pleaded with the authorities that he only used the flag to save his family from rain, as he had no money to get a shed. However, the authorities informed him that using the flag for such a purpose was against the law, and ignorance of law or not knowing the law is not an excuse. Had the vendor known the law, he would have probably not done so. This is one of the many reasons you need to know the law, even if you're not a lawyer. Moving to the Indian Constitution, I am going to make a very, very strong claim today. that is the Indian Constitution, is one of the most progressive constitutions in the world today. And I believe every word of this statement, and let me tell you why. When we speak of the most powerful nations in the world, United States of America is usually the first name that comes to our mind. However, you would be surprised to know that United States' original constitution had no protected rights for its citizen. In fact, African American and women were not given equal right. They were not the same as white men. The US Constitution considered African Americans as a property that could be easily bought and sold in the market. Therefore, you can see that allegedly the most progressive nation treated people differently on the basis of gender and race. However, our constitution does not do so. Our constitution was extremely progressive and cosmopolitan, if I may say so. We were among one of the first few constitutions that guaranteed to every citizen that he or she shall not be discriminated on the basis of her sex, race, religion, caste, etc. Women and men were equal and had the same rights. We were conscious of the deep-rooted caste system in India and its perils, which is why the caste system was abhorred and there could be no discrimination on the basis of caste in India. India is a land of diversity, and some may even say that its diversity is evident from the fact that every 100 kilometers in India, the language changes, the food changes, because we have such diverse people and such diverse cultures in our country. To protect this diversity, we incorporated special provisions to protect our indigenous languages and also our indigenous people. You would be surprised to know that despite being a land where Hindus constitute majority of the population statistically, we adopted a secular constitution that allows people of all faith and belief to live under the same constitution, and we respected their rights. This was contrary to some of our neighbors who went the other way. And as we saw, they've had multiple regime changes, they've had dictatorships, they've had their constitution changed, but India has never had that. In fact, the composition of our constituent assembly was dominated by the Hindus because statistically they constituted the majority of the population. But they still decided to adopt a progressive constitution that supports harmony and not divide. In fact, the makers were criticized by a quarter for giving us a constitution which was insufficiently Hindu. This, I believe, speaks volumes about the vision of our founding fathers, who wanted India to be truly secular and not dominated by any one religion. We adopted a parliamentary government where the people elected the representatives of the parliament, who in turn chose the prime minister. If actions of a political party in power did not please the people, they can remove them during the next elections. Further, the laws made by the parliament could be challenged before the courts, who have to ensure that actions of the House comply with the Constitution. This moment allows me to share an interesting story regarding India's decision to choose a parliamentary system like ours over a presidential system in the USA. I'm sure all of you are updated or have at least heard of what's been happening in the United States elections. If I may take you up to speed with it, right now, basically, we don't know who has won the presidential election. Mr. Joe Biden relies on numbers to say that he has won the presidential election, whereas President Trump relies on his power to say that he has won the election. And that is what is so peculiar about the US, that once you elect a president, you are stuck with him for 5 years, and he cannot be removed for 5 years unless you elect unless exceptional circumstances arise. It is even said that if both the president and the Congress, which is the equivalent of their parliament, are occupied by the same political party, the president can act as a dictator. With this background, let me narrate an interesting story about our first Prime Minister, late Shri Jawaharlal Nehru. While we were deliberating over the system of what India should choose, that is a presidential system or a parliamentary system, Pandit Nehru was told by a leader that he should press for a US system, since it would allow him unlimited powers to govern the country, since the Indian National Congress at the time dominated the legislature, and he could therefore do more public good and he could do it faster because there will be no opposition. However, Pandit Nehru, being the visionary that he was, dropped the idea, stating that while I may not behave like a dictator, even if I have the support, there might be somebody in future who does behave like a dictator and has the power, and that shall ruin our beloved country. This entire episode shows us that how important the nation's well-being was to our leaders, who did not crave power despite having the opportunity. Another interesting fact is a leader's political clout or standing did not determine our constitution's provisions. And in fact, popular leaders were often overruled by the assembly. For instance, Pandit Nehru was often overruled by the assembly. He wanted more freedom for citizens in terms of what they eat. And hence, he did not want a provision in the constitution that could in future allow prohibition of cow slaughter, because he believed that there were parts of India which ate that kind of meat. However, he was overruled by the assembly, which clearly disagreed with him and thought that no, cows are sacred to Hindus. We should not allow that. But this entire incident shows us importantly that there was no one leader that dominated the assembly, and it was the consensus amongst the members that drove the course of how our constitution came about. And both these instances show us that the assembly was democratic and, despite disagreement, had the greater good of its citizens in mind. Let me now come to interesting and important provisions of the Constitution which you should know. Undoubtedly, the most important provisions of our Constitution are the ones that guarantee certain fundamental rights to every person in India, quote unquote. Conceptually, fundamental rights are certain core rights which every human being has by virtue of being alive, which is how you understand it theoretically. Let me elaborate and throw some light on that, as they are very crucial for all of you. Equality. The Constitution guarantees equality to every citizen and obligates the state, which is the government and its agencies, to not discriminate against any individual on the basis of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth, or any of them. This means that you cannot be treated differently by the government and its official solely based on your gender or your religion or your caste. The government is supposed to treat you with respect and dignity. For instance, tomorrow, if you apply for a government job and the only reason you are rejected is because of your gender or your caste, then you should know that the government is wrong in doing so, and you have a right to challenge the government and tell them they can't do it, because you have a right that tells you you can't do it. In fact, to all the women and girls present in the audience, you should know that any law that discriminates against women on the basis of their gender or assumes stereotypes about them also violates your rights. This can sometimes be done indirectly too. For instance, if the government advertises a job stating that only individuals who are over 6 feet tall can apply, are eligible for the job. While prima facie it may seem like it's a valid requirement, 6 feet tall is not something specific to gender, it's a very general requirement. However, if you see through it, you would see that it is aimed at rendering more women ineligible than men, as statistically men are taller than women. So there will be few women who are taller than 6 feet, and there will be more men, and they will get through. This kind of discrimination or indirect discrimination is also prohibited in our constitution, because it wants to have a level playing field for people irrespective of all these facts. I'm sure that you are aware of our nation's deplorable history with casteism and caste system. We traditionally had four castes in Hindus in India, that is the Brahmins, Kshatris, Vaishyas, and Shudras. As you know, it was a top-down model where the Brahmins were considered the purest who did the priestly work, the Kshatriyas were the warriors, the Vaishyas were the businessmen, and the Shudras the help. In fact, the caste system was so deeply rooted that the Shudras were treated like untouchables, which is pathetic, as your mere birth cannot determine your fate. They couldn't access public wells, temples, schools, etc. In fact, Dr. Ambedkar, the father of our constitution, himself faced so much discrimination and disgust only because of his caste. If anyone is interested and wishes to know the sad history of this deplorable practice, they should read the classical work of Annihilation of Caste by Dr. Ambedkar, which highlights his struggles while growing up, and it's a moving read. Our Constitution abolishes this practice of untouchability and makes it a punishable offense. So, if somebody discriminates you on the basis of your caste or denies you entry into a public place solely because of your surname or your caste, it is a punishable offense, and you have every right to challenge it. An extremely important and crucial right available to all the citizens is the right to freedom of speech, guaranteed under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A of the Constitution. This is an extremely important right and highly contentious as well. It guarantees every citizen the right to speech and expression. Speech can be expression through words, like I'm speaking to you right now, that is speech through expression. Speech can be expression through actions. So if you are liking this talk so far, you giving me a thumbs up would be an action. If you don't like it so far, you giving me a thumbs down would also be an action. And you have every right to do so. Why? Because in India, we have the freedom of speech and expression, and we can all agree to disagree with each other. That's totally allowed. I personally believe in the famous words of Voltaire, who had said that I may not agree with what you say, but I shall defend to death your right to say so, which is the essence which is embodied in our freedom of speech and expression. The idea behind guaranteeing this right is to maintain a healthy democracy in India. This democracy is basically understood in the traditional sense of the government by the people, of the people, and for the people. In other words, you elect a representative who puts forward the public's grievance in the parliament. However, if the government or your representative is not doing what you expected of them or is doing something wrong, you have every right to speak against it and bring it to their attention. However, while doing so, one should be cautious that your opinion and the exercise of this right are respectful. It is worth noting, however, that there are certain limits to this right, to freedom of speech, and there are certain things that you cannot say. For instance, you cannot say anything that goes against the sovereignty and integrity of India, the security of the state, public order, contempt of court, defamation, or incitement to an offense. The idea underlying all these restrictions is that your right to speech should not go against someone else's right to liberty. Just like you have a right, I also have a right. And your right should not come in contact with mine because I have the same rights as you. Let me give you an example. Although a fictitious person, has a right to freedom of speech, B also has a right to liberty and reputation. Therefore, A cannot say anything bad or untrue about B, exercising his right to speech, since that will violate B's right to reputation. Because of this situation, we have a law like the defamation, which is an exception to your right to free speech, that you cannot defame somebody in exercise of your freedom of speech. Similarly, A has a right to freedom of speech, while B has a right to liberty and safe environment. A cannot say something under his right to speech that will instigate people to commit crimes, as that shall interfere with B's right of safe environment and protection from crimes. Hence, we have the exception of incitement to offense. Similarly, we have the exception of contempt of court, security of states, etc., that can all be explained in this fashion. In simple words, so long as your right to speech does not interfere with someone else's right to do something, you are free to exercise it and say what you want. There are laws which protect this fundamental right, and there are also laws which impose restrictions on it. Particularly for women and ladies present in the audience, if a man or a boy uses disrespectful or inappropriate language towards you, you should know that he has no right to speech to do so, because while he exercises his right, he is impinging on your right to liberty, and that is not allowed in our law. My practical advice to all of you, and this is especially as a lawyer, is to be respectful if you do criticize someone or you criticize anything the government does. Using vulgar language or disrespectful terminology does nothing but grab attention and media headlines, which is not becoming of students studying at such eminent institutions. It might seem cool, but it's both. It's disrespectful and it's not becoming of what you do. The other most important aspect of our constitution is also the right to life and liberty, which is guaranteed to every person in India. The words life and liberty are very broad and very expansive. This right has been interpreted to include aspects of dignity, which means that the government cannot do anything that affects uh, your dignity as a human being. The right includes the right to clean air, the right to clean water, the right to health, right to privacy, and right to sleep. I'm sure that's a right students are very interested in a right to peaceful sleep. The government is obligated to ensure that nothing it does infringes this particular right because it's one of the most important rights in our constitution. The Indian constitution is also a secular constitution, and hence it ensures that every citizen has a right to freedom of her/his religion. This means that one is entitled to freely practice and propagate their religion. In other words, a Hindu is allowed to practice and read the Bhagavad Gita or go to a temple and pray. A Muslim is allowed to read the Quran. A Christian is allowed to read the Bible, etc. You can practice everything that is part of your faith so long as it does not affect public order, health, or morality or other rights enshrined in the Constitution. Because again, that would be two competing rights coming together. So your right should not affect somebody else's right because he or she is entitled to have them. For instance, recently, the religious practice of killing animals in a barbaric fashion was struck down by the court as it impacted the health of humans and animals in the views of the court. Therefore, you have the right to practice your religion so long as your practice does not affect public order or health or morality. Now, some of you may ask me that, Mr. Tripathi, while I understand that I have these rights, but what do I do if the government or its functionaries does anything that takes away these rights from me? What is my remedy? There is a famous saying that, what's a right without a remedy? To this, I would say that I would take you to Article 32 and 226 of the Constitution. And Article 32 has been termed as the soul of the Indian Constitution by Dr. Ambedkar. This article is so important because it allows you to knock the doors of the courts if your fundamental rights are violated. It guarantees to every person the right to approach the Supreme Court of India or the High Court if any governmental action violates your fundamental right. Interestingly, this right is not just available against the government, but against any body performing a public function. Now, public function here means anything that benefits the public, like health services or education. So, tomorrow, if you go to a hospital and the hospital doesn't give you the right kind of treatment or discriminates against you, you have every right to approach the court saying, my right to health has been violated because this organization is performing a public function, and you would be within your rights to do so. An interesting thing about the article, which all of you should know, is that it allows you to approach the court for not only violation of your own rights, but also violation of the rights of others, like people who don't have the resources like you do. Or even if there are, so if I had to give you an example, if there is somebody who works in your house and you know they don't have the money or resources to approach the court or put forth their grievance before the authorities, you can do it on their behalf because the Constitution allows you to do that. That you can speak up you can be the voice for the voiceless and put forward their grievances in front of the court if their fundamental rights are violated as well. There are also situations where you might feel that the government is doing something which violates the right of everybody in general. Every citizen's right is being violated. The best example would be if you believe that the air around your house or the air in the area you live in is not clean, it's polluted. Now, this is something that is affecting not just you, but everybody living in that area. Even in that case, you have the option of bringing it to the court's attention through the concept of a public interest litigation, which is any member of the public deeming fit to bring a public issue in the eyes of the court and telling them that, see, we are suffering because of something the government has done or has not done. Please do something about it. And a public interest litigation does not require you to be a lawyer. It can be filed by anybody, any citizen of the country, so long as they want to do some public good. Now, the origin of the public interest litigation, they have a very interesting story as to how the concept came about. So we had a very impressive judge, in fact, two very impressive judges in the Supreme Court, called named Justice P.N. Bhagwati and Justice Krishna Iyer. And Justice Bhagwati was a champion of individual rights, and he did a lot of good when it comes to uplifting and giving a voice to the voiceless. He mentioned in an interview that he had gone to a very remote village in India, and he got out of the car and he was walking, and he told himself that I sit in this mighty institution called the Supreme Court, where I think I'm doing justice to the people and I'm looking after the people. But he saw that this village was extremely underdeveloped. It had no electricity, it had no water, and the situation, like, people didn't have proper clothes, they didn't have the resources. And that got him thinking that maybe my justice is not reaching the people. That can be for many reasons. A reason could be that a judge sitting in the Supreme Court cannot know what's happening in a small part of Uttar Pradesh, let's say in Unnao. They wouldn't know what's a Supreme Court judge cannot know what's happening there. So he thought that if I can't be everywhere and know what's happening or where the government is going wrong, how about I devise a tool where the citizens tell me what's wrong in a particular area, and basis that information, I'm going to take an action on that. Hence arose the concept of a public interest litigation, where the members of the public apprise the court of something that's wrong where they live or something they've seen, and then the court can do something about it. There is a concept of an epistolary jurisdiction, where the court decided to expand this right further. You don't even need to file an official case with the court. You can just write a letter to the judges highlighting the problems being faced by you. And this started with prisoners' rights. For instance, in parts of India, in the under trial prisoners were not being given food. Didn't have the basic human decency code that was implemented in these prisons. So somebody decided to write a letter to the judge, to the Supreme Court, and the judges saw that letter and they were so moved that they decided to look into the issue only on the basis of a mere letter written by a citizen. Similarly, what has the court started doing now is court has started relying on news articles, media articles. If it highlights something grave that's happening in any part of India, the court will agree to take action on that. And the best example I can think of at top of my head right now is recently the Chief Justice of the Patna High Court, which is the High Court in Bihar, saw that the midday meal during the lockdown and was not really benefiting the students because they could not get food, and this was based on an article in the Indian Express. And the court decided to call the government and ask them why midday meals are not reaching the people. So this is just an example of how you as a citizen could come forward and bring to the court's attention that there is something wrong where you live and there is something wrong which you've seen. If I had to share a personal sorry, if I had to share a personal example, and I was talking about it to Director Sir as well, is that I personally have been on the benefit of something like that, this existing, or this concept existing, where a citizen can approach the court. Because when I was in law school and I was interning with the lawyer, at that time I had worked on a couple of interesting cases with him, which dealt with the constitution and rights of people. But when that matter was to be argued in the Supreme Court, I told my senior that, sir, I want to see how cases are argued. I want to learn. But the registry told me that on Mondays and Fridays, law interns are not allowed in the court because it overcrowds it. And I was very dissatisfied and I was very disheartened. But then I spoke to a lot of other people every time I used to go to the court, and I realized that in the Supreme Court, there were litigants coming all the way from the southern parts of India. They were coming all the way to Delhi just because on one particular day their case was listed. And often that case will not be taken up. So you had people from all over the country running to the Supreme Court just to hear what's happening in their case. And I thought that is extremely, extremely sad, because people are traveling, spending their hard-earned money to travel. And despite the Supreme Court being a public institution that kind of is responsible to the public, and it should open its doors to the public. You and I should be allowed to see what the court is doing and how justice is being delivered. And I was particularly impressed with how the UK Supreme Court works because, and this is something you can definitely try out, sitting in your hostel or your house in Kanpur, you can see the arguments in a case being argued in the United Kingdom Supreme Court because they have their live streaming of proceedings and everybody around the world can see what's happening. So, inspired by all of that, I decided that, okay, I'm going to raise this issue with the court and tell them that this is an arbitrary rule and it's denying citizens their right to access and my right to learning as an intern. So, I drafted a petition and I filed the petition before the Supreme Court and I decided to argue it. Now, something very peculiar, and that's something very, very peculiar to the Indian Constitution and our laws, is that it allows you the right to argue your own case. So if you feel that you don't want to hire a lawyer or cannot afford a lawyer, A, you have a right to legal aid, free legal aid. So everybody is entitled to get a lawyer. You have a fundamental right to do that. Second, if you think you know your case well, you know your grievances well, you yourself can go and argue before the court and put forward your case. And if the court feels that you are conversant enough to put forward your case, it will allow you to do that. And trust me, it's not just lawyers who can do this. I know of a lot of people who are public servants, who are not lawyers, or who are people from all walks of life, who have decided to take up causes that were so personal to them and argued them themselves without hiring a lawyer. So surprisingly, on the petition, we've had a judgment, and the court has agreed to live stream its proceedings. And the first court to do so was the Gujarat High Court last month, so or earlier this month, if I'm not wrong. And sitting in your comfortable houses, you can see what's happening in the Constitutional Court of Gujarat, the High Court. The reason for narrating this entire story was that don't think that you need to be a lawyer to make any difference or to bring to the court's attention if the government is going wrong anyway. You can definitely do that. Now, coming to something very peculiar about our Constitution, it is a part called the fundamental duties, which, although not enforceable or binding, but they are ideals that it expects every citizen to follow. They are, and I quote, A, every citizen is expected to abide by the Constitution and respect its ideals, institutions, the national flag, and the national anthem. B, to cherish and follow the noble ideals which inspired our nation's struggle for freedoms. C, to uphold and protect the sovereignty, unity, and integrity of India. D, to defend the country and render service when called upon to do so. To promote harmony and the spirit of common brotherhood amongst all the people of India, transcending religious, linguistic, and regional and sectional diversity. To renounce practices derogatory to the dignity of women, which is an extremely important duty. To value and preserve the rich heritage of our composite culture. To protect and improve the natural environment, including forest, lakes, rivers, and wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures. To develop scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform. To safeguard public property and to abjure violence. And the last, to strive towards excellence in all spheres of individual and collective activity so that the nation constantly rises to higher levels of endeavor and achievement. These values are what our constitution makers envisaged every citizen to live by. And I believe everybody should live by them, both me and you. However, based on my reading of the Constitution and everything I have spoken of today, if I had to summarize what the Constitution teaches and expects of youth like you, which is our present and future, it would be as follows. A, it expects of you to be accepting and tolerant. India is a diverse country, having people from different faiths, religion, backgrounds. By prohibiting discrimination on any account, the Constitution expects us to be tolerant and accepting of people from every background and culture. Someone from Uttar Pradesh should feel as welcome in a southern state as he would in his hometown, and vice versa. Acceptance is not just limited to your physical characteristics, but also ideologies. And this is a very important point in times today. For instance, I may be somebody who differs from your political ideology or belief. But that should not affect or influence my behavior towards you. Ideology aside, I should still treat you with the same respect and dignity, irrespective of how you think about a particular issue. The caste system should be particularly abhorred. It is an evil of the past that has legally been buried, but practically still exists. Every day, we read reports where someone from a particular caste is killed because he decided to ride a horse on his wedding, which infuriated the so called upper caste members. Such incidents are a slap on our face and should wake us up to realize that we need to do something about them. And a change can only start from the youth, which is before me as they are the future. It's difficult to convince the older generation to change rather than instilling a change in the younger generation. Similarly, every person is entitled to be treated with dignity, irrespective of their economic or social status. The Constitution expects you to outlaw practices like forced labor or begar as it is called. In fact, it expects you to treat every person, irrespective of what she or he does, with respect because she or he has the same rights as you. From a billionaire to a cleaner, both are ideally protected and liable under the same constitution that applies to them. Similarly, one should shed away all stereotypes one has regarding concepts of gender, caste, sex, or race. The Constitution empowers you to fight for others and not just yourself. Educated youth like you should use this knowledge to benefit the lives of people who are not as fortunate as you. You can do so by raising their causes through a simple letter to the authorities or a simple letter PIL to the judge, telling them that there is something wrong happening and I request you to do something. Help, but it's tough to run it. So what you can do as educated and responsible citizens is help the government by highlighting the areas where it is doing something wrong. All of us are educated here, and we are privileged to be educated. And all it takes to help the government is writing one small letter. Let me give you a very interesting personal example of this fact. So last year, when I was in Delhi and I was working, I had come home to Kanpur on Dashera and Diwali. And I had read about this brilliant initiative which the government brought about of Swachh Bharat, that is cleaning India. And for the first time, we were speaking about having our surroundings clean, having our streets clean, and people should be hygienic, etc. But when I came to Kanpur and I was coming back from the station with my father, and I saw that there were heaps of garbage in every corner I could see, and near my house there were heaps of garbage everywhere. And I wondered, and I told my father that on one hand, the government is telling everybody to clean, and the government is spending so much money on it. Why is it not happening on the street level, and why are the local authorities not doing anything about it? In fact, our chief minister had himself propagated and had spoken about it at great length that he wants people to be responsible. And at that time, there was a study that had come out saying that Kanpur is the 8th smart city of India. And here I was looking at the garbage in front of me thinking, this is not a smart city. This is a very, very careless and a very irresponsible city. So, personally aggrieved by everything I saw, I decided to write a letter to the Honorable Chief Minister. And it was a very long letter in Hindi and English both, where I told him that, sir, your government is really trying to get the streets clean and do something about the city, and the prime minister is doing that, but the district level officials are not taking that seriously because look at this. And I went all around the city, I clicked pictures of everywhere there was garbage, and I wrote a nice 8 to 10 page letter to him, and I just thought, I know nothing's going to happen, why would they listen to what an ordinary citizen like me is saying? But I did send that letter. And 2 months later, I got a call from my father, and he said that, did you send something to the government, to the chief minister? And I was like, then I remembered, oh yes, I had. I was like, yeah, I had. I remember the city was not clean and I was really agitated and I'd sent this. Why? What happened? He said, today morning, the municipal authorities were at our doorstep and they had a photocopy of something you had written. And they said that they have instructions from the higher officials that if they don't clean these spots, their jobs would be in jeopardy. And they were requesting Mr. Swapnil Tripathi, who was not in Kanpur at the time, to come inspect all these places who has been cleaned who have been cleaned just because a citizen raised a grievance about it. So I think this entire story tells you that I nowhere mentioned that I'm a lawyer in that letter. I just said that I'm a responsible citizen of this city. I've grown up in Kanpur. I love Kanpur. And this is not good for our city. It gives us a bad reputation and it's unhygienic. But the fact that I took a shot in the dark and the government decided to take action on it, in a nutshell, explains you that you can do the same. And if you feel something is wrong, please speak up. Be respectful. I would never advocate for being rude or being abusive or something like that. Be respectful, but tell the government where it's wrong, because that's how they find out what they are missing out on. You can't expect them to know everything. So, in a nutshell, the Constitution expects you to be ideal citizens by abiding with fundamental duties. It expects you to be better citizen because we have an important role to play as well in where our country is headed. Before I conclude, I would like to reiterate the words of Dr. Ambedkar, our founding father, who had said, "A constitution, no matter how good, if the people implementing it are bad, will be a bad constitution. A constitution, no matter how bad, if the people implementing it are good, will be an excellent or a good constitution." So despite having one of the world's best constitution, if people like you and I decide to not implement it or live towards its spirit, it will turn out to be a bad constitution. As citizens of India, today let's take a pledge that we will be constitutionalists. That is, the people who believe in the Constitution and implement this document to the best of its spirits and achieve the ideals which shall make our nation truly the greatest in the world. Thank you so much, Jai Hind.